Imagine a boy standing in the hallway, his father's shoes far too large for his feet. They flop around him as he tries to walk, leather creaking, laces dragging on the ground. He doesn't laugh at the awkwardness. He doesn't treat it as dress-up, because for him, it isn't play. It is duty, an early assignment to fill shoes that were never his to wear. That picture is not just metaphor. It is the lived reality of many men who feel, even decades later, that their childhood was never theirs. Some were asked to step in when a parent collapsed into illness, addiction, or silence. Some absorbed unspoken shame, carrying burdens that belonged to adults who never learned to carry their own. Others were simply born into chaos and became the stable one, the quiet one, the caretaker. Childhood turned into apprenticeship in survival. If you've ever felt like you skipped the stage of carefree play, that your first teacher was not imagination but responsibility, then you know the hidden wound we're naming here. It is the wound of a stolen childhood. Not stolen in a dramatic sense, but in small, invisible exchanges. Every time you put away your toy to soothe an angry parent, every time you became the listener, the little therapist, while your own feelings were pushed into silence. Every time you felt guilty for wanting to rest or dream, because someone else needed you to be strong. Psychologically, Jung would call this an early encounter with the shadow of adulthood. Responsibilities meant for later years arrive too soon, and instead of learning through play, the child learns through vigilance. Neuroscience tells us that chronic stress in those years floods the developing nervous system with cortisol. The brain rewires for scanning, bracing, anticipating. What looks on the outside like a mature child is often just a nervous system on high alert, and the body remembers. The debt created in those years is rarely spoken, but it lives on. It is a sense that you owe the world something: care, competence, steadiness. You must always be the one who holds it together. Many men describe this as feeling older than their peers, yet lonelier, unable to relax into friendship or joy. Even in success, there is a hollowness, because the foundation was never built on innocence. It was built on survival. So here is the question that carries us into the heart of this journey. What happens to a life when responsibility replaces imagination as the first teacher? When survival takes the place of wonder? When the boy who wanted to run barefoot in the grass instead learns to guard the family's fragile stability? In the chapters ahead, we will not just name these hidden contracts, we will untangle them. We will explore the invisible trades: childhood for duty, play for perfection, joy for survival, and how they shape the men we become. And more importantly, we will look at how to return to that locked toy chest in the attic of the psyche, open it, and meet again the child who never stopped waiting for you. But for now, I want you to pause. Notice how your body responds as we speak of this. Do you feel heaviness in your chest? A tightening in the throat? Maybe a quiet grief? Or even a resistance? It wasn't that bad. I just grew up fast. These are all echoes of that early contract. Simply noticing them is the first act of reclaiming your story. The boy in his father's shoes could not grow into them overnight. And yet, he tried. You tried. That effort is not shameful. It was survival. But survival was never meant to be the whole story. This video is about what comes next. The invisible contract. Childhood traded for survival. There is a kind of contract signed in silence, not with ink, but with glances, tone of voice, and the absence of safety. A boy sees his mother in despair, or his father lost to anger or absence, and something in him makes a vow: I will hold this together. No one asked him directly. No paper was handed over. But in his nervous system, in his soul, a deal was struck. Childhood traded for survival. This is what psychologists call parentification. A child stepping into the role of rescuer, mediator, emotional partner, or therapist. Jung would say this is the rescuer archetype entering far too early, forming a premature adult. And while society often praises the boy who is responsible, calm, and dependable, what we miss is the hidden cost. His nervous system never learns ease. His play is replaced by scanning for danger. His natural selfishness, the kind that is healthy in childhood, gets buried under a mask of service. From the outside, he looks like the boy who matured quickly. From the inside, his body is learning something else: hypervigilance. Neuroscience gives us clarity here. When children live under prolonged stress, their cortisol levels spike repeatedly. The brain adapts by wiring itself to stay on high alert. This becomes a baseline state. What appears to be maturity is often just trauma adaptation. A boy learning how to predict storms before they arrive, how to keep the fragile system of the home from collapsing. If you listen closely to men today, you'll hear this story again and again. On online forums, countless men write about being the man of the house at 10. They speak of carrying siblings, calming mothers, stepping in when fathers were gone or violent. They say it made them reliable providers, hard workers, men who never fail in their duties. But they also say it left them emotionally absent in relationships, disconnected from their own needs, and terrified of being vulnerable. The invisible contract gave them strength, but it also cut them off from the softness of being human. This contract doesn't vanish with adulthood. It hides in the shadows of identity. Jung described the shadow as the unlived, unacknowledged parts of us. For the prematurely responsible boy, the shadow often contains his joy, his needs, his playfulness, his dependency. He grows into a man who finds it nearly impossible to rest without guilt, who feels more comfortable in crises than in calm, who confuses being needed with being loved. And here lies the paradox. What looked like maturity was survival. What looked like strength was vigilance. What looked like loyalty was fear of abandonment. When we untangle these threads, we begin to see that the contract was never fair. It asked the child to carry what was never his to hold. So what is the path forward? First comes recognition, noticing where in your life you are still carrying burdens that do not belong to you. Sometimes this begins by mapping the roles you played. Who were you protecting? Who were you rescuing? Which emotions did you bury to keep the peace? This inventory of roles can be written, spoken, or simply reflected upon. The act of naming them begins to break the contract's hold. Second comes relating. Jungian work is not about blaming parents, but about seeing clearly. You can speak inwardly to the boy you were, acknowledging, you carried this because no one else could. You kept the system alive, but it was never your job. That internal dialogue matters. The nervous system listens when the adult self finally validates the child's self. Third comes rewriting. If the old contract was, I must hold everything together, the new statement may be, I can choose what is mine to hold and what is not. This is not a quick affirmation. It is a slow re-education of the body and psyche, repeated gently until it feels real. And finally, rehearsal. In everyday life, that means practicing in small ways. Saying no when you feel the old pull to fix everything. Letting silence stretch without rushing to soothe it. Allowing another adult to carry their own frustration without stepping in. These small rehearsals rewire the nervous system toward freedom. The invisible contract is heavy, but it is not permanent. It was signed in silence, and it can be broken in silence too. By bringing awareness, compassion, and choice into the places where survival once ruled. The puppet of achievement. Why early responsibility breeds perfectionism. When a child learns that love arrives only when he is useful, achievement becomes more than a goal. It becomes survival. The boy who was praised for being mature or responsible discovers early that performance brings peace. If he brings home good grades, if he stays out of trouble, if he keeps the household running smoothly, the storm inside the family quiets for a while. And so, unconsciously, he ties his worth to doing rather than being. This is the hidden wound of perfectionism. Worth equals performance. Success becomes the only language of love. Jung would see this as another face of the shadow. The boy represses his longing to be loved simply for existing, and instead pushes forward a mask of achievement. The world applauds, the family praises, but inside the hunger grows. The applause never fills the void because the void was created by conditional love. Neuroscience shows how this happens. Every time a child is rewarded for achievement, dopamine floods the brain. Normally, dopamine is meant to help us seek novelty, growth, and joy. But in this case, it becomes tied to a survival strategy. The boy learns, I feel safe only when I succeed. What should have been a source of play, building skills, testing limits, becomes a drug. Success is no longer freedom, it is a cage. This is what psychologists call the Pygmalion effect. Expectations shape reality. The boy senses that his family or teachers expect him to excel, and so he performs. But the cost is that he loses touch with his inner rhythm. He no longer acts from joy or curiosity, but from fear of what will happen if he stops. Achievement becomes a puppet master, pulling his strings. And the irony is that the more he succeeds, the more trapped he feels, because the stakes rise with every step. We see this mirrored in culture. Take the film Whiplash. A young drummer pours every ounce of his life into pleasing a ruthless teacher. His talent grows, but his soul contracts. The drum beat becomes both his salvation and his prison. That story resonates because many men carry a similar rhythm in their own nervous system. They become CEOs, high achievers, or pillars of responsibility, outwardly successful, inwardly exhausted. The cost shows up later in relationships. A partner might ask for emotional presence, but the perfectionist man only knows how to offer performance. He gives gifts, provides stability, excels at work, yet struggles to rest, to listen, to share vulnerability. The very traits that once earned him love now block intimacy. This is where the deeper twist appears. What was once celebrated as discipline, focus, and reliability is in truth a survival pattern. And patterns, when left unexamined, eventually strangle the life out of the man who lives them. So how does one begin to untie these strings? A gentle framework is to distinguish between 3 layers of validation. First, external applause, the recognition that comes from others. Second, internal integrity, the quiet knowledge that your actions match your values. And third, genuine joy, the simple aliveness that arises when you act for no reason other than that it feels true. Many men live their whole lives chasing only the first. Some manage to reach the second. Few allow themselves the third, but it is the third that restores the soul. Joy without productivity, presence without performance. It may sound almost irresponsible to the perfectionist mind, but it is actually medicine for a nervous system that has been wired to equate safety with success. Perfectionism is not a moral failing. It is a wound dressed in discipline. And like all wounds, it carries the possibility of healing when brought into light. Jung would say the unlived life of joy waits in the shadow, asking to be integrated. The question is not whether you will keep striving. That instinct is deeply ingrained. The question is whether you can also learn to breathe, to act from wholeness rather than fear. The puppet of achievement is convincing. It will tell you that slowing down is dangerous, that you will lose everything if you stop performing. But beneath its strings, the human heart longs for something different. To be loved without condition, to rest without guilt, to play without needing applause. That is not laziness, that is freedom. The fatherless king, the archetype of authority, without guidance. Every boy looks instinctively for a map, a guide into manhood. In myth and in history, this is the role of the elder, the father, the mentor who carries wisdom and says, "This is the path, walk it with courage." But when that figure is absent, whether through death, neglect, emotional distance, or sheer unpreparedness, the boy is left to improvise. He becomes a king without a crown, a leader without initiation, forced to wear authority without ever having learned how to hold it. Jung described this archetype as the king in shadow. Without a true initiation, the king becomes distorted. Sometimes he grasps for control, becoming tyrannical, harsh, rigid. Other times, he collapses inward, unable to carry the weight, retreating into passivity or avoidance. In both cases, authority is not grounded in wisdom, but in reaction. The nervous system, deprived of a model, mirrors survival instead of guidance. Neuroscience offers a striking parallel. Mirror neurons, the brain's natural system for imitation, fire most strongly when we observe role models. Children learn authority not from abstract lectures but from embodied examples. When those examples are absent or inconsistent, the child improvises authority through defense mechanisms. He learns to dominate in order to feel safe or to withdraw in order to avoid exposure. Either way, the model is missing, and the improvisation carries into adulthood. Hyperindependence often grows out of this soil. On the surface, it looks like strength, the man who never asks for help, who prides himself on carrying the load alone. But beneath it lies dependency, on control, on work, on being the one who never fails. This is the paradox. The independent man is often deeply dependent on his armor. He cannot let it go, because without it, he fears collapse. This pattern shows up across lives. A man rises quickly in his career, but every decision is driven by the fear of being unmasked as unprepared. Another becomes the unyielding father, demanding obedience from his children because he never learned another language of authority. Another distances himself entirely, hiding in passivity, because the weight of leadership feels impossible without a guide. Each story is different, yet each carries the same missing thread: initiation. What then is the path toward integration when the elder never came? Here, myth and psychology converge. If the biological father could not teach, the symbolic father can still be found. History, literature, spiritual traditions, even living mentors can serve as initiators. Jung himself pointed to the need for men to consciously seek out archetypal models, to adopt, not blindly, but deliberately, a lineage of guidance. Consider Viktor Frankl, surviving the concentration camps. He was not handed authority through inheritance. He carved it in chaos, by choosing meaning where none was given. His authority was not born from dominance, but from depth. This is the kind of mentorship that can be chosen even in the absence of a father. A symbolic father can be a writer, a teacher, a spiritual guide, a leader whose life offers a pattern to study and adapt. The practical work begins by naming who holds that role in your own imagination. Whose biography moves you? Whose words linger in your mind? What qualities in others make you feel both humbled and strengthened? Tracking these influences consciously transforms them from unconscious projections into chosen guidance. It is not imitation, but alignment. Authority without guidance is fragile. Authority grounded in chosen mentorship becomes durable. The fatherless king can step into sovereignty not by pretending the absence did not matter, but by acknowledging it and then seeking what was missing. This is not about recreating childhood. It is about consciously weaving into adulthood the initiation that never arrived. In Jungian terms, this is individuation, the process of integrating what was lost or shadowed into conscious strength. The boy who was forced to improvise authority can grow into the man who embodies it authentically, not through domination, not through withdrawal, but through meaning. The archetype of the king does not disappear just because the father was absent. It waits. It waits in the background of the psyche, longing to be inhabited with clarity. And when it is finally approached, not with pretense, but with humility, the authority that emerges is no longer shadowed. It is steady, rooted, and alive, the frozen child within. Why men feel empty, despite success. A man can climb the ladder of success, collect titles, and check every box society tells him to check, and still wake up with a hollow ache in his chest. It is not the absence of achievement that haunts him, but the absence of joy. Somewhere along the way, the natural instinct to play, to laugh, to create without purpose was buried. What remains is efficiency without aliveness, discipline without delight. This is the wound of the frozen child. In order to survive early responsibility, joy was often the first thing sacrificed. The boy who once wanted to play soccer, to draw wildly, to run without a destination, learned instead to tighten, to suppress, to brace. He carried the family's chaos, and in doing so, he froze his own spontaneity. As an adult, the nervous system remembers that freeze. Even moments meant for rest or fun feel uneasy, like a waste of time. Philosophy offers a stark mirror here. Schopenhauer described life as a pendulum swinging between boredom and suffering. For the prematurely burdened child, the pendulum rarely reached joy. Duty consumed one side, emptiness consumed the other. Neuroscience now shows that chronic suppression of play dulls the brain's dopamine circuitry. What once lit up with delight at small pleasures grows muted. The adult learns discipline, but loses wonder. The paradox is sharp. The same discipline that gave survival later sabotages aliveness. What saved the child, control, vigilance, structure, becomes the very thing that starves the man. He can build companies, provide for a family, remain outwardly strong, and yet feel strangely detached, as though watching life through glass. Consider the story of a CEO who once admitted on a podcast that after decades of building his empire, he realized he had forgotten how to laugh with his son. He described the moment with tears, realizing that joy was not simply missing from his schedule, it was missing from his body. His nervous system no longer knew how to relax into play. For many men, this confession strikes painfully close to home. Jung would call this the exile of the inner child. The psyche, in order to protect itself, places the playful self in a locked room. It is not destroyed, but it is hidden. The adult then carries on without it, efficient but incomplete. The work of individuation, of becoming whole, is to unlock that room and invite the child back, not as weakness, but as medicine. This does not mean abandoning discipline. It means restoring balance. Discipline built a structure. Now joy must animate it. A simple entry point is to create small rituals of play, moments where the body can relearn that joy is safe. Even 15 minutes of unstructured activity, sketching, moving, improvising, begins to retrain the nervous system, not for productivity, not for applause, but for aliveness. Many men resist this, fearing it childish or irresponsible. But notice the irony. The very resistance reveals the wound. To dismiss play is to confirm that the child self is still frozen. Releasing him does not make the adult weaker, it makes him whole. The frozen child within does not disappear. He waits, patient, holding the key to vitality. When finally welcomed back, the success that once felt hollow begins to feel different. No longer an empty shell, but a vessel that carries laughter, creativity, and presence. Success then is not only measured in what is achieved, but in the life that is actually lived. Breaking the cycle, from inherited burden to chosen responsibility. Every man carries more than just his own story. In his shoulders, his breath, and even in his silences, he often carries the unfinished stories of those who came before him. Sons inherit not only eye color or temperament, but also the unspoken burdens of their fathers and mothers. Trauma does not simply vanish when a generation refuses to face it. It travels forward, reshaped, seeking resolution in those who follow. This is the wound of generational inheritance. A father who was denied tenderness may raise a son who feels tenderness as weakness. A mother who was abandoned may raise a son who believes it is his duty to never leave, even when he is drowning. These inherited patterns are not conscious choices. They are emotional debts passed along, often without a word. Modern science now confirms what Jung intuited. Epigenetics shows that trauma can alter the way genes are expressed, meaning the body literally carries echoes of what ancestors endured. Jung described this on the psychological level as the collective unconscious, where unprocessed shadows live on. For the individual, this means much of what feels like personal failure is actually ancestral weight, an unfinished task handed down. The trap is repetition. Sons often replay their father's wounds, not because they want to, but because the psyche unconsciously seeks to complete what was left unresolved. A man who watched his father consumed by work may also throw himself into overwork. Another who saw his father collapse under addiction may unconsciously seek out chaos in relationships. Without awareness, the cycle turns endlessly, one generation echoing the last. But there is a possibility hidden inside the repetition. Cycles can be broken when what is unconscious becomes conscious. Jung called this individuation, the transformation of shadow into strength. To individuate is to look clearly at the burdens carried and then ask, which of these are truly mine, and which belong to those before me? This distinction matters. Not all responsibility is bondage. Some responsibilities are life-giving, shaping purpose and direction. Others are inherited burdens, chains mistaken for duty. Freedom does not mean rejecting responsibility altogether. It means choosing consciously. A simple way to begin is to imagine 3 columns. The first, what is mine? These are the responsibilities that align with values, integrity, and chosen commitments. The second, what is theirs? These are burdens inherited, your father's rage, your mother's despair, your family's silence, that you did not create and cannot resolve on their behalf. The third, what is ours? These are shared responsibilities, relationships, communities, causes, where the load is carried together. This filter creates clarity. Many men discover they have spent years living in the second column, carrying what never belonged to them. The shift is not instant, but it begins with recognition. Each time the old pull arises, to save, to fix, to carry, you can quietly ask, is this mine? Is this theirs? Or is this ours? Culture offers its own warnings. In The Godfather, Michael Corleone inherits a burden that was never truly his. Out of loyalty, he steps into a role that consumes him. What began as devotion to family ends with the loss of his soul. The story is tragic, but it is also instructive. When we accept responsibilities that are not ours, we risk being devoured by them. Breaking the cycle is not betrayal. It is love expressed differently. It is saying, the suffering ends here. It is choosing to live not as an echo of unfinished stories, but as a man who can carry his own with clarity. Jung would call this sovereignty, the point at which a man is no longer governed by the unconscious inheritance of the past, but by his own integrated self. Inherited burdens will always whisper, but chosen responsibility speaks louder. And when a man learns to tell the difference, he does not abandon his family. He honors them by refusing to repeat their pain, reclaiming the lost boy, turning survival into sovereignty. Picture an old attic, dust floating in the thin light that slips through a cracked window. In the corner sits a toy chest, locked, forgotten for years. One day you find the key and open it. Inside are the toys of your childhood, still waiting, untouched, as though time had not passed at all. This is the image of the child within you. He was never destroyed, only hidden away, frozen by necessity. He has been waiting for you to return. The story we have traced carries a heavy weight. Childhood traded for survival. Achievement turned into a cage. Authority without guidance. Joy frozen in the body. Generational burdens inherited without choice. These are not abstract ideas. They live in nervous systems, in relationships, in the way men breathe and carry themselves every day. And yet, the thread running through them is not despair, but possibility. Maturity is not about killing the child inside. It is about giving him what he never received: safety, play, voice. The boy who was silenced can now be heard. The boy who was overburdened can now set down the load. The boy who was denied joy can now taste it again, not as escape, but as integration. When this happens, responsibility no longer consumes. It becomes chosen. Work becomes meaningful, not compulsive. Leadership becomes steady, not tyrannical. Relationships become mutual, not performances. A man who integrates his child self does not regress into immaturity. He steps into resilience. He becomes capable of carrying responsibility without being crushed by it, because he carries it from a place of wholeness. This is sovereignty, not the brittle armor of hyper-independence, not the empty shell of perfectionism, but the quiet strength of a man who knows his inner boy is safe. Sovereignty means you are no longer ruled by the contracts of the past, but guided by a self that is integrated, rooted, alive. The toy chest in the attic was never meant to stay closed forever. When you open it, you do not lose authority. You gain depth. You gain the freedom to hold both the man and the boy together, to live not only as a survivor, but as a whole human being. So the question remains: what burden, carried since childhood, are you ready to set down? And when you do, what room might open for joy to return?